Which is better for wildlife photography, a telephoto prime or a telephoto zoom lens? Matt Zeffy with B&H here, and today we are testing some of Canon's best telephoto lenses, both primes and zooms, to see which one truly delivers in real wildlife scenarios. And yes, we've traveled all the way from New York City to be here in the American West, Yellowstone, Montana. We'll be looking at how these lenses perform when it comes to sharpness, autofocus, subject tracking, and real-world usability, and versatility, low light, and challenging wildlife environments to see which is the best tool for the job. So what do you say we get started? Wonder what they're thinking.
How are you this morning?
So why choose a prime lens? One of the biggest advantages of prime lenses is aperture, as we'll be focusing on Canon's fast primes for this video. So lenses like the RF 400mm f2.8, for example, allows for a lot more light than a zoom that maxes out around 5.6 or f7.1. This means faster shutter speeds without cranking the ISO. It's better in low light and better subject isolation and remarkable background blur. Another major advantage is optical quality. Since primes are built with a fixed focal length, they tend to have less distortion, better contrast, and superior sharpness. Autofocus performance is another area where primes often excel. With fewer moving elements inside the lens, they're usually faster and more accurate, which is critical for locking onto wildlife in motion. But let's address the bison in the room here, because it's worth noting that with conventional prime lenses like your everyday 50mm f1.8, you often get a much lower price than a similar zoom. But that's not really the case when it comes to these more premium, fast telephoto primes. The RF 400mm and 600 are among the most expensive lenses Canon makes, costing much more than a zoom alternative at a similar focal length. The downside is clear here. You're locked into one focal length, so if your subject moves too close or too far, you have to physically reposition yourself or you miss the shot. So one thing about the primes that I'm having a little hard time with in the field, especially at 600, that is such an extreme focal length, and it's fantastic for photographing smaller animals or even just animals that are really far in the distance, but birds in particular. But the thing with primes is you don't have the flexibility to zoom out, find your wildlife, and then zoom in to actually get that nice shot. So that's one of the benefits, the major benefits of shooting on zooms, is you kind of have that versatility. Again, we say versatility all the time with the zooms, but it really is a major thing in finding wildlife, especially if you're using any kind of external screen. It's a little bit more difficult to find and just track the wildlife without being able to zoom out first to find it. But the results are absolutely beautiful in the prime. So but this lens is like, actually no, this is a really sharp lens. This 100 to 500 is actually very impressive. So then why choose a zoom lens? Well, the biggest reason to go with a zoom lens is versatility. With a lens like the RF 100 to 500mm, you can frame a subject from multiple distances without moving your physical position. For wildlife photographers who shoot in unpredictable conditions such as these, a zoom lens can mean the difference between getting the shot or missing it entirely. All right, this is a perfect scenario where I want to opt for a zoom. A 100 to 300 f2.8, for example, is perfect here because I can get that 2.8 separation, so there's beautiful fall off behind these bighorn sheep here, and it just looks incredible. At 100 to 300, having a zoom, the ability to back off, allows me to get a whole different variety of shots that I otherwise would not be able to get if I had a prime and I was fixed in there. For example, sometimes the bighorn sheep will run after one another, or they'll collide heads or kind of get into little scuffles here and there. And because of having a zoom like the 100 to 300 or even the 100 to 500, I'm able to capture that perfectly without being too close or being at a fixed focal length the entire time. I could easily change focal lengths on the fly. Another major advantage is portability. Instead of carrying multiple primes, a zoom like the 100 to 300 f2.8 or 100 to 500 covers a wide range of focal lengths in a single package. And finally, there's the cost factor. A single zoom lens can replace multiple primes, making it a more budget-friendly option. Add teleconverters to the mix with the compatible zooms like the 100-300, and you can extend the versatility even more. But what about image quality? Let's talk sharpness and detail, and to be honest, this is where those primes really shine. At the end of the day, most wildlife photographers who opt for these primes like the 400 or 600, and even some of Canon's other offerings like the 300 or 800, for the most part, they're after the top image quality, and that's observable in those fast primes out in the field. Beyond just sheer sharpness and detail, primes also offer minimal chromatic aberration and any other unwanted optical discrepancies. All in all, they do one single focal length really well. How does the fall off compare? Taking a look at the fall off and background isolation of subjects with a fast prime, they do a remarkable job of near immediate fall off when shooting wide open. And this is another area where they really shine. This allows you to remove those unwanted distractions in the background of your subject, and as someone who loves to incorporate foreground into my wildlife photos, it also allows me to do that without it being distracting in any way. The primes excel in both autofocus speed and accuracy. And that isn't to say that the zooms are slow in any way, especially the RF 100-300 f2.8, which is actually very close to the 400mm prime, but the primes having less moving parts and less to do overall delivers faster autofocus, especially in low light. All right, I am absolutely freaking out right now because we just got this bald eagle perched on a log out here with the most beautiful light that you could possibly ask for. Snow-capped mountains in the background. I'm using the R5 II and the 600 prime for that shot, and I used the pre-capture mode because I wasn't quite sure when the bald eagle was going to take off. So what I was doing was half pressing the shutter constantly to make sure that I have those pre-capture photos registered in. Fully press the shutter once it takes off, takes flight, and then I was just tracking it across the entire sky, full burst mode. And let me tell you, these are some of my absolute favorite photos of a bald eagle that I've personally taken, and I was freaking out the entire time. Both the 400 f2.8 and the 600mm f4 lock onto subjects almost instantly and make it easy to track fast-moving wildlife at different distances. When it comes to ease of use, the zoom lenses win here. The RF 100-300 f2.8 is much easier to handle than the 400 f2.8, especially when tracking moving subjects handheld. The 100-500's ability to zoom in and out makes it much more adaptable in the field, and one thing that is always hard to get used to when you're photographing wildlife on primes is the inability to zoom out, find your subject, and then zoom into exactly where that subject is. This is really only the case for smaller wildlife, especially birds, but it's definitely a learning curve. So I'm switching back and forth between a prime and a zoom lens right now on the 100-500 just to try and see what's going to work best for this scenario here. A circumstance like this, you're pretty much better off using a zoom because unless you need the immediate separation that a prime is going to deliver with the 2.8 or f4 that a lot of those telephoto primes have, you can get away with the versatility and the lightweight of a zoom because you don't necessarily need all that light when it's midday and kind of harsh light right now as well. This is looking really good with the R5 II and the 100-500. This is a perfect scenario for the 100-500 and using a zoom lens in general because the moose are kind of
shifting in the scene quite a bit. They're coming a little bit closer, they're going a little bit further, they're going behind trees, in between trees. And the ability to zoom out and in is absolutely crucial in a scenario like this. I had the 400 prime and I put it down as good as it looks. I don't necessarily need that 2.8 aperture in this circumstance, but I do need the flexibility to zoom out between 100 and 500.
Also for primes, unless you buy multiple of them, and that would be a very expensive pursuit, but each are fixed at a very particular focal length, which means that your scope of wildlife is also limited to that focal length as well, as it may be challenging to photograph a bison with a 600 mil. But of course, that entirely depends on distance to the wildlife as well. Low light scenarios are where primes are generally always going to come out on top since they have that faster aperture. Now, the one exception here is that beautiful 100 to 300 f2.8, but once you add teleconverters, then you begin to lose light with the 1.4 and the 2x. What does all of that mean exactly in the real world? Well, we can shoot later into blue hour when the sun is no longer providing light, and this could provide some really unique results. And overall, in low light scenarios, we don't have to crank our ISO much at all, which means we can get cleaner images as a result.
They're a little skittish, so I'm trying to be a little quiet. All right, this is incredibly special. We just spotted an ermine off the side of the road, and they are so tiny and extremely hard to find, not to mention the fact that it's getting pretty dark right now. So a fast aperture prime is really the only tool that I could go with for this, unless I would probably get way too much noise shooting in this dark of a condition with a much slower aperture. So the 600 prime, because the ermine is so tiny, is the perfect lens for this exact scenario, and I'm gonna see what I can get here.
Oftentimes, us wildlife photographers will find ourselves in dense forests as well, where everywhere is pretty much dark, and a fast prime really comes in handy here. You'll also find that with zooms, you're often trying to see how slow of a shutter speed you can get away with in order to lower your ISO. But then if an animal takes off running or a bird flies away, your shutter speed is too slow. So overall, having a prime with fast apertures allows you to shoot at higher shutter speeds.
Got this adorable fox about 100 yards out, and it's squinting, I think because of the sun, as am I. It's very bright right now. And I'm switching between the 1 to 500 and the 600 prime to really see which one works best. And obviously the prime, I'm getting significantly more separation. Just the fall off behind this fox is like immediate, and it just looks absolutely beautiful. So I'm actually using this little snowbank in front of us as some foreground here. It just adds a nice way to draw more attention towards the fox. Now, the difference between our zoom that's a little bit slower and the faster prime, of course, is that we get the separation in the foreground as well. So the foreground is completely blown out in terms of, like, it's just very blurry, and it looks a little bit more beautiful on a fast f4 prime, whereas a little bit more of it is in focus, which can be a little distracting when you're using a slower lens, which tends to be most zoom lenses.
If you're a wildlife photographer who prioritizes absolute image quality and low light performance, a fast prime is the way to go. Because of the lack of versatility in being able to zoom, you'll likely miss some of the photos, but the photos that you do hit will usually be better than a zoom. But if you need versatility, portability, and flexibility, a zoom like the RF 100 to 500 or 100 to 300 f2.8 is the better choice, especially if you're a beginner in wildlife photography and looking at more budget-friendly options. Then a zoom lens is going to be your best bet, something like the 100 to 500 mil or even the Canon 200 to 800 mil that's also very popular. Either way, we're actually filming this very video on a pair of Canon C80s, and this crew keeps trying to steal the RF primes from me, so I think it's pretty clear which ones they prefer. But how about you? Are you team prime or team zoom for wildlife photography? Let me know down in the comments. My name is Matt, and thanks for watching.